The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
So this is where I think the regulators are really letting us down. We're pretending like it's 1980. It's not 1980. We could hit 1.5 degrees C rise this year, probably next year for sure with El Nino. And so I feel like our regulators are living in the past. We need to live in reality. We need to recognize the value that clean energy brings us.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, utilities taking risky bets on natural gas. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. That is how you can help the show. And please tell a friend. That is another great way to help the Clean Power Hour by spreading the word about the show. There are many professionals who don't know this show exists. Check out our YouTube channel. Of course, we're on all the audio platforms, but check out our YouTube channel, hit that bell, subscribe to the show, and reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to hear from my listeners. My guest today is Nancy LaPlaca. She is a regulatory policy expert. Welcome to the show, Nancy.
Thanks, Tim, for having me.
I'm excited to bring this niche topic to my listeners. You know, we energy professionals, we all live under the rules and regulations that PUCs are enforcing, and sometimes, it's a combination, right? It's a combination of utilities and their rules and regulations, and then how the PUCs, the Public Utility Commissions, are overseeing them and regulating them or not. But give our listeners a little background on yourself. How did you become interested in regulatory policy?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. My path here was different than most people's, I'd say markedly. I started out as an advocate, fighting clean coal, integrated gasification combined cycle to be precise, with CCS, carbon capture and sequestration. And as many people now know, it doesn't work. Clean coal is an oxymoron. It never did work. And carbon capture and sequestration, unfortunately, is a road that we seem to be going down, but more people are aware that it doesn't really work. It's just not viable, too expensive, risky, doesn't scale. And so I started out fighting clean coal. I did that for a few years. And then I moved into natural gas as an advocate, as a self-funded public interest advocate at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. And with my friend Leslie Glustrom, and Leslie took on coal, and I took on fracked gas around 2007, 2008. At that time, fracking was just getting started, and Colorado was an early state. And so I learned a lot about fracking, gas supply, reserves. I had some excellent witnesses, experts, a guy named David Hughes, who's written many reports. He's kind of energy expert, Richard Heinberg's right-hand guy. He's written many reports called Drill Baby Drill, and he is still someone out there. He's been retired for many years now, but he continues to crank out reports about how fracking wells are increasingly depleting. The laterals are longer. They use more water, more sand, more chemicals. So I learned a lot about natural gas early on. Then I ended up helping a guy named Paul Newman, who was then a county commissioner in Cochise County, Arizona, because they were going to fight a clean coal plant, build a clean coal plant in his district. That was quickly abandoned because they didn't have the water and it doesn't work. And so I ended up helping the Democrats in Arizona in 2008 with an election, because Arizona is one of the elected states. In that election, we, meaning clean energy advocates, we won 2 seats, and I went on to become the policy expert and advisor to one of those commissioners whose name happens to be Paul Newman. That is his real name. And Paul Newman, along with Democrats Sandra Kennedy and current Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, who's quite a brilliant energy analyst and is now the Attorney General of the state of Arizona, we formed a clean energy majority. And in the 2 years that we had that majority, Arizona passed one of the best energy efficiency laws in the country. That was 2010. And then honestly, in the 2010 election, the anti-clean energy forces dumped tens of millions of dollars and basically took over the commission. And so the trajectory that we were on pretty much ended, and it really hasn't been able to get traction since then. After working as Commissioner Newman's energy advisor for 4 years, then I went to work, I have my own consulting business, and basically have been helping advocates, solar industry, the Illinois Solar Energy Association. I worked for DOE for a while at Interconnection. So basically, Tim, various issues around clean energy, but mostly working in the regulated states space, which, as you mentioned, is where the public utilities commissions have the most power. In deregulated states, public utilities commissions still exist, but they have much bigger constraints around their authority.
Yeah, here in Illinois, we're a deregulated state. Our PUC is called the Illinois Commerce Commission, the ICC. I've had Carrie Zalewski, the former head of that organization, on the show. She now works for a clean energy developer. But you referenced clean coal, so I want to point out to our listeners that CCS, carbon capture and storage, is very much in the landscape of the federal government's incentives for energy in the U.S. Check out episode 128, where I present an article by Peter Montague, my father, about the 45Q incentives in the IRA. The title of that show is Poison Pill for the IRA. Old white men are ruining the future for young people. Because what CCS does is it incentivizes the fossil industries to burn, baby, burn. And to quote unquote capture carbon from smokestacks, put it into pipelines. We are building 60,000 miles of pipelines in the United States to carry compressed CO2, liquefied CO2 in pipelines, and buried in the ground in places like my backyard, which is central Illinois. I'm also in a coal state. Illinois has massive coal reserves, mostly in the central and southern parts of the state, but we have mine-mouth coal-burning power plants in the state of Illinois that hold huge swaths of the population captive, actually, paying higher than market rates, because these are plants that are fueling co-ops and munis, which is 30% of the state's population, but probably 70% of the state's real estate, so to speak. So anyway, and I mean, one of the emergent properties of that is that businesses in communities like Naperville, Illinois, want to leave Naperville because they're paying too much for power. So if you're a manufacturer and you have a high energy bill, you're going, wait a minute, my neighbors in Chicago are paying 3.5 cents and I'm paying 14. WTF? So anyway, but Nancy, you've got some interesting, current stories and experiences. I would love to hear about your work with ISEA, the Illinois Solar Energy Association. That's my home state. I work nationally, but am very involved in the solar industry here in Illinois, and then also in your home state. What is it? Is it North Carolina or South Carolina? I think it's North Carolina, right? You're dealing with a co-op or a muni utility, which has been quite interesting as well.
Yeah, and Peter, I want to mention that when you told me you were Peter Montague's son, I remember so clearly reading your father's analysis of CCS and 45Q
Yeah.
back when it was kind of like, the green screen era, back when, before, well, it was years ago. And your father was just a hero. He outlined it so well. I just remember that so well.
Well, he still is.
And he still is good.
He's still writing. He's just blogging these days. He no longer writes Rachel's News, which is what he's best known for. Rachel's Democracy and Health News, as it was known. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, he is an incredible person, and I stand on those shoulders, so to speak. So
That's great. And I grew up in Illinois.
I
grew
didn't
up
know
in
that.
suburbs. Yes, I did. I grew up in River Forest.
Oh,
And then
cool.
my family moved west to around Downers Grove, Oak Brook area, and a lot of my family still lives there.
Yeah.
I want to mention something about the Illinois bill, which, as you know, is really good. The Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA.
Yep.
960 pages long. And really what thrilled me about that law was it was like a page and a half on retail net metering. And if I was going to help someone write a paragraph about how we need retail net metering, and let's not mess it up by allowing utilities to reduce the rate or add fees, go right to that section of CEJA.
Okay.
And there's an interesting story about CEJA, Peter, that I think people need to know.
Tim, you're calling me Peter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's understandable.
Anyway, that when you look at when that bill was passed, which was September 2021, I remember it well, that the utilities were not allowed at the negotiating table. Why? Because they were being investigated for massive fraud. And that fraud was so big, it brought down the Ohio Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, and it more or less brought down Michael Madigan, who was the Illinois Speaker of the House.
It certainly
Who'd
did.
been in politics for 47 years, whose daughter Lisa was the Attorney General of the state. And the reason why that bill was so good was because the utilities were forbidden from being at the table to negotiate that bill. Now, one of the things I love to show my students is if you look at Illinois solar, they went from 0 to 60 miles an hour, boom, after passing that bill.
Well, after FEJA, first we got the Future Energy
FEJA.
Jobs Act, right? That was the real accelerant. We'd had an RPS since 08, and the goal was 25% by 2025. We were not going to achieve that, right? The RPS was quote unquote broken because we were not on pace. And then FEJA was an accelerant. We were still not on pace though with FEJA. And the amount of funding going into the program was too little. So the funding in Illinois for solar, and this is great if you're working in another state to learn from this. It frustrates me, Nancy, that we're reinventing the wheel 50 times over in all 50 states, when there are some very good places that have set the foundation for how to do things. And I'm curious what you think about that. I have my short list, but in Illinois, we fund clean energy incentives and zero energy credits, which is the nuclear equivalent, with a small fee on consumer power bills or ratepayer power bills, right, in the IOU utilities. So in Northern Illinois, that's ComEd, and Central and Southern, it's Ameren. There's also Mid-American, which has a carve out in the western part of the state, West Central, a small part of the Quad Cities area. But for the most part, it's Ameren and ComEd. Then there's the munis and co-ops, which don't really play, and that's a much longer, more complicated story. But that fee, if it's too small, there's not going to be enough money in the program, and that was the case with FEJA. So it was a boom and a bust, right? We got like two years of let's go, and we're doing large C&I, lots of residential solar. And utility solar took off because of that program. Now, after that bust, we got CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is a fix and a complete kind of revamping of the RPS, right? And now we're Our RPS, I think, is 100% by 2040 or 2045, maybe. I think 2040. But so it's one of the better RPSs now across the country. But there's many places now that have 100% RPSs. I'm sure you can rattle off all the states, but there's over 100 cities and states that have 100% goals now by, I think, 2040 or 2050. So,
yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Tim, that brings up an interesting issue. If there's no path to get there, then it's really difficult to get there. So I want to bring up a couple things. One is, if I remember right, CEJA had about 600 million a year for clean energy. It was
Could be.
600 million a year,
Could
something like that. Well, that's a lot of money. Of course, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's dwarfed by fuel costs. Absolutely dwarfed. So let me launch into another aspect then that you brought up, a muni. So my utility is very unusual in that it's owned by the local university. And the reason why it's owned by the university, it's actually a state university, is because the university predated the utility. So it's technically a state-owned utility. So my utility, I was the first customer in 108 years to intervene. 108 years, which to me tells you something about the process, that the process is broken. The process, my friend Leslie Glustrom used to say, let's put the public back into the Public Utilities Commission.
Right.
Just like the utilities call themselves, Arizona Public Service Company, Colorado Public Service Company. No. These are private companies. They have taken the world public and just used it. So again, my utility is a poster child for something that's happening in other utilities, larger utilities, and that is that the cost of natural gas is going up. So my utility, which has the worst solar rules in the United States, despite the university claiming that has been defining sustainability since 1899, when the university was founded. And those rules, called buy all, sell all, have resulted in 15 solar systems in 15 years. Now, it was almost fun going to the Public Utilities Commission in North Carolina and watching the faces of the commissioners as they realized that the town of Boone, which is known for being progressive in the state of North Carolina, had installed only 15 solar systems in 15 years. And yet, the cost of natural gas went up so much for this small utility that they had to borrow 43% of their expected retail sales just to cover the increase in gas costs. So let me repeat that and unpack it, because it's a lot of numbers in this stuff. So my utility sells about $16 million worth of electricity a year, 16 million. Well, the cost of natural gas went up so much they had to borrow $7 million. That's in addition to the money that they had already planned to spend for natural gas fuel. They're 85% natural gas. If you look at Duke Energy, I just reviewed one of the fuel dockets. Duke Energy, one of the subsidiaries in North Carolina called DEC, Duke Energy Carolinas, had to borrow $1 billion, $1 billion, because their natural gas costs went up so much. Now, what I see from the regulators, who are, perfectly nice, smart people, and I would say, and I've seen studies that say this, that the regulators are more knowledgeable than they used to be. It used to be kind of a graveyard for former legislators who wanted to make more money or just keep working in government because it pays more than a lot of state legislatures. And so these guys are smart, but here they are. They let Duke Energy get away with this, $1 billion in extra fuel costs, $1 billion. So we are allowing these utilities to take an unbelievable risk that natural gas costs are going to go down. And let me point this out in the state of Arizona, which I know well. I lived there 27 years. I worked for 2 members of Congress, the Arizona Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, a bunch of state agencies, and was a policy advisor. You have a state that has about 25% less solar than North Carolina, and yet it's much, much, much sunnier. they're literally running out of water. The Colorado River, at the current rates, there's a National Geographic article this month on the Colorado River. And what they say in that article is that at the current rate of decline, the Colorado River will no longer be sending water within 6 years.
Yep.
6 years,
Yep.
3 to 6 years. Now, here's what's scary about that. Tucson, a city of at least 1 million people, 100% dependent on the Colorado River. Las Vegas, couple million people, 90% dependent on the Colorado River.
Yep.
State of Arizona as a whole, 50% dependent on the Colorado River. I mean, we are looking at a disaster. And what did the Arizona regulators do just last week? They further devalued solar. So you have a state like Arizona, which imports all of its natural gas, has to build pipelines to import that natural gas, and has to pay for that natural gas, whatever it costs. And yet the regulators are doubling down on natural gas and killing solar. And unfortunately, that's what we see over and over and over. And so you have a state like Illinois, which is, relative to Arizona, is much less sunny. And yet Illinois is going to crush Arizona on solar. It will crush them. The other thing
I don't know, because there's a lot of utility solar happening in Arizona.
Well,
and that's the other
Tim.
That's the other thing here, Nancy, that really irks us clean energy professionals is you can have really bad legislation in a state, let's say Florida or Texas. These are states that don't really have RPSs, but they have lots of solar. They just don't have DG solar. They don't have distributed generation. They don't have strong residential and C&I incentives. The utilities are going, oh, well, solar, wind, and storage are the cheapest sources of energy. We're going to install gigawatts and gigawatts of utility solar, like Florida Power and Light is doing in Florida, and like NextEra is doing all over the country. Very large scale. And I have nothing against large scale solar. I'm a huge advocate, actually, for large scale solar. It's a both and, though. We need to also take advantage of the fact that we have this built environment and brownfields where we can put DG on rooftops, on old construction sites that are just dilapidated, or on brownfields, true brownfields like landfills. My own closed landfill here in the city of Urbana is now solarized with community solar that's targeting low and middle income off-takers, and that's a beautiful thing, because otherwise you can't do anything with a closed landfill except pray that it won't contaminate your groundwater, which it often is doing. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. So, but we were talking about, we need to loop back to Illinois, because you did quite a bit of work with ICEA around the time that we were getting CEJA, I believe. And CEJA is good, but it's not perfect. Like, there's a cliff coming, for example, in net metering, right? In 2025, the cliff is going to happen for residential solar. It's already happening for C&I solar. If you take advantage of the smart inverter rebate, then the off-taker does not get full retail net metering, because, I mean, the smart inverter rebate is generous. It's 10 to 15% of a project's cost coming back in a lump sum to the owner. So it is compelling for the owner to take that incentive, but it also then devalues net metering. And just, if you're a listener and don't understand what happens when you devalue net metering, dig into, for example, NEM 3.0 in California, where they devalued solar by something like 70%, I think, at the beginning of 2023, and it has crushed the solar industry there. The solar industry has fallen off a cliff, even though everyone was very Pollyannish last fall about, well, we're going to do solar and storage now, and it's going to be okay. Well, guess what? Yeah, you are doing more storage, and that's a good thing. But the whole industry is tanking because when a consumer doesn't get a payback, they don't do it. That, money really talks in energy. It's economics trumps everything else. You could be the biggest environmentalist in the world, but if the payback period is 15 years, you're going, wait a minute, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be in this house for 15 years is often the calculus that gets done, or this building if it's a C&I project. So what was your involvement with CEJA and ICEA?
Well, with CEJA and ICEA, that 960-page bill had to became rules. So it's kind of like the way Congress works. Congress passes a law like the Clean Air Act, and then the EPA, which is the agency, they are the ones that implement the rules that relate to the legislature. Well, what my role with ICEA was to help them understand how that law became rules, and to help the solar industry, which was mostly local and regional solar companies, which, as you know,
for sure,
is kind of what happened to the solar industry, help them understand what needed to happen. In fact, the biggest fights, Tim, were interconnection and then REC prices. So REC prices, renewable energy credit prices, how much would those rebates be? And the interconnection agreement, when and how that figured in as a milestone. Now, your point about residential rooftop solar taking the shorts is well taken, because really we are busy killing clean energy. Now, I would encourage you, go look at the SEIA graph for Arizona. Mm-hmm. And what you will see is that in the last few years, they kind of killed residential solar in 2013 when they killed net metering.
Yeah.
And since then, residential solar is actually more capacity than utility scale solar. You know what that means? 200 times more, installations. When you consider that 1 megawatt of solar is about 200 rooftops.
Yeah.
And so basically what Arizona, now they're finally doing a little bit more utility scale solar. But what the commission is doing by reducing that net metering, by reducing the amount of money that people get paid when they send excess generation to the grid, similar to net metering, but not net metering, like exactly what you said. It kills solar. It kills rooftop solar. And unfortunately, in this country, we've been doing that now for a while. I'm sure you know this. Look at Australia. 1 out of every 3 homes has solar.
Yeah.
They have almost as many solar installations as we do in this country, but their population's 25 million and we're 330 million.
Yeah.
If you look at what my utility did, which is if you put solar up, you must sell every kilowatt hour to the grid, every single one, for 3 cents. No one in their right mind would put up solar. Mm-hmm. Because what happens with that kilowatt hour is it goes to my neighbor and the utility sells it to my neighbor for a retail rate. So basically,
right. And what is that retail rate? I'm just curious.
Well, here's what's funny too, Tim, something to pay attention to. In 2021, it was 9.5 cents for my utility, one of the lowest in the country.
Yeah.
Then it got raised to about 11. That's where it is now.
Yeah.
What's it going up to very soon, like next month? Almost 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Why that jump? Fuel costs. Because when you're 85% natural gas, you are completely dependent on fuel costs. And something that we haven't even talked about yet is the damages from those fuels. So natural gas, because it is climate accelerant on steroids, it's CO2 on steroids is what methane is. Yep. It is 86 times worse for the climate than even CO2, and it breaks down to CO2 in water. So you end up with the same problem. You have a climate warming gas. So, the utilities, by ignoring the fact that solar is a climate solution, that solar, when you put solar up, the cost of your electricity then is pretty flat, unless your installer has an escalator. If you own the solar system, it's going to displace your fuel costs. And so we don't even recognize that. I mean, states like, I think what's going to happen in the future is states like Arizona, which are still running coal plants on groundwater, that is profoundly stupid, that you're going to find that,
meaning they're using the groundwater for cooling.
Yeah, They're running coal plants on groundwater.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Duke Energy. I looked this morning, Duke Energy Carolinas, which is North Carolina and South Carolina, DEC and DEP, they own 350 megawatts of solar. They own 9,000 megawatts of coal. Right. 9,000 megawatts. Most of those plants are 50 years old.
Yeah.
50 years.
And they are being sunsetted.
So this is where I think the regulators are really letting us down. We're pretending like it's 1980. It's not 1980. We could hit 1.5 degrees C rise this year, probably next year for sure with El Nino. And so I feel like our regulators are living in the past. We need to live in reality. We need to recognize the value that clean energy brings us.
I like the point that you made in your opening remarks, that utilities are there as a service, right? And we gave them this special power of being a regulated monopoly in most markets, whether they're IOUs or quote unquote public power, which is munis and co-ops, which you also point out is a misnomer, calling them public power sometimes or many times. And so the utilities are there for humanity, though, for society, right? To provide us, 99.99999% uptime and electricity. And for the most part, the grid does work very well in places like the United States. I here in Central Illinois seldom have blackouts or brownouts, very seldom. So we have a very reliable grid, and I'm grateful for that. But times change, right? And the utilities are not changing fast enough with the times. And as a result, there is a ton of friction between the utilities and the clean energy industry, which is consumers want clean energy. They want to decarbonize the economy. They want cleaner air. Air pollution kills 6 million plus people a year globally. It's a massive negative health impact. It's causing climate uncertainty, climate chaos. And that is going to be extremely costly, both in health, food systems, migration, defense, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the cascading interactions there are so many. Most consumers just have no concept of the cost of climate change. It seems very distant, right? It's out there somewhere in the mist. And yeah, we're seeing fires and floods and droughts and we are seeing and heat waves, right? We are seeing real impacts from climate change now for ordinary people in many parts of the U.S., not to mention the global South, right, where mass migration is occurring. And guess what, people? They're going to come to your backyard, and that's not a happy thing. I mean, we have immigrant camps now, right, in our major metros. From Venezuelan migrants coming all the way from Venezuela to North America because things are not good there. Well, if your food system is disrupted, that's not good, right? And you have no choice but to migrate because starvation is not happy. So climate change does have a very real cost. We're just scratching the surface in terms of the real costs. But let's get back to this PUC business and what does society need to do? Right, you've got the a regulated monopoly, the utilities, and then you've got this oversight, the PUC, and together they're not getting the job done, so to speak. Right, there's still a lot of friction for the transition that consumers and the clean energy industries want to make happen, and they want to fulfill these RPSs, but I mean, it's a huge problem. I just came from Minnesota. Okay, Minnesota had their state conference last week. Mm-hmm. The wait times for interconnection with Xcel, a major IOU that covers a huge swath of Minnesota, are over a year for distributed generation like community solar, and it's crushing the community solar industry.
Yeah,
and Xcel's just going, so sue me, right? I mean, that's the thing is they are very, very, very powerful. So how do we change that?
Yeah, and it's a conundrum. Back when they designed the system of state regulators, which was, back in the 1930s. Samuel Insull, who's a very famous guy who was, Edison's right-hand man,
Yep.
they knew that when they designed the regulatory system, that it would be easy to capture the regulators. And I would say one of the things that I feel like I've seen in my career is that it is so complicated that people just don't engage, and that the utilities, instead of directly addressing the problem, they've just made things more and more complicated. So it makes it more and more difficult for people to understand. So what do we do about this? Well, we have to hold our regulators' feet to the fire. And one of the reasons why it has been so difficult is that it's really hard to appeal a decision by a Public Utilities Commission. The bar is very high because they're quasi-judicial agencies that have a lot of power. And so it has to be pretty egregious for a court, a regular court of law, to overturn what they do. And then you've got utilities like Duke Energy, who's one of the biggest, most powerful lobbyists and campaign contributors in the state of North Carolina. Duke Energy. What's Duke Energy trying to do? Protect their monopoly. That's what they're trying to do. And so by making things more and more complex, I think some of the solutions are, for example, look what Connecticut, Maine, and Colorado just did. They just passed laws that don't allow utilities to use their money to lobby and to do things like take people out to dinner and stuff. They're imposing ethics. This
Yep.
should have been done a long, long time ago, because the problem is that money talks, of course, and that's what's undermining our democracy. Here in my little town, the university, which owns the utility, dumped $25,000 on the city council race, where people spend $1,000 or $2,000. I was on town council for a couple of years because they wanted friendly council people. They actually didn't win, despite spending more money than anyone had really ever spent in the whole history of the town. Mm-hmm. They didn't win. And this is the kind of heavy-handed, putting your thumb on the scales that happens with the utilities. They're winning because of complexity. The problem, I think, that's happening, is you have young people who are not just depressed, but angry and depressed, who see what's coming. And there's this gap. And I remember talking to people like Hunter Lovins about this well over a decade ago, that you have all these people here who want to act on climate. And then you have the public utilities commissions here who have so much power, and there's a giant chasm. And how do we affect the regulatory decisions? You have to go in there, unfortunately, and mix it up with them one-on-one. That's why I'm the only customer in 108 years in my utility to challenge them, despite the fact that 90% of the customers have wanted clean energy for over a decade. Mm-hmm. Survey after survey after survey. I mean, you know this, Tim. I remember back in 2009, when I was working for the commission, we gave APS, it was like $800,000 to do a deliberative poll where you ask people what kind of energy you want, then you spend time and energy educating them, and you pay them for their time. Then you ask them the same questions. Overwhelmingly, people wanted solar once they learned about it. But what is the utility doing since then? Killing solar. Yeah. They're killing it. And they're locking us into natural gas. I remember talking to David Hughes, my witness, about this in like 2007. We said, what's going to happen in the future? Here's the nightmare scenario. We increase our fossil fuel burn, which is what we're doing. We increase natural gas, which is a worse for the climate than even coal. And we start running out of fossil fuels. And that's what's happening. The fossil fuels that we dig up are dirtier and dirtier. The health effects are worse and worse. We have coal power that the utilities, to generate it used to be 3 cents. Now it's 5 or 6 cents, but the damages are 30 cents. In natural gas, the damages are bad too, because they're climate. So we have an industry that refuses to recognize reality, and we have regulators that let them get away with it.
I mean, the U.S., with the assistance of organizations like the Sierra Club, have campaigned to close down coal plants and accelerate their migration to other technologies. I mean, one of the major trends that happened in the last 20 years is coal plants converted to natural gas plants. And there is a reduction in CO2 on a per unit of electricity when you burn natural gas versus coal. But are you suggesting that in the greater scheme of things, that the industry, the natural gas industry, because of the leakage of methane from those wells and from pipelines, that when you convert your economy to natural gas from coal, you're not actually you're not reducing the climate footprint?
You're not at all. And here's an interesting aside. I spent a long time unpacking the greenhouse gas inventory and methane leakage. I spent years on that stuff. And here's an interesting side note that has a huge effect right now on what we're doing. So the EPA has always followed the IPCC's GWPs. Okay, let's unpack that. The global warming potential of various gases, right? Mm-hmm. So the EPA has always followed the IPCC, except for methane, except for natural gas. And they made the decision, it was during the Obama administration, to not recognize that starting with the fifth assessment, it might have been the fourth, that the IPCC upped the global warming potential of natural gas from an initial 25 to 86. Why? Because methane breaks down really fast. And so there's no point in having 100-year time frame to determine what the global warming potential is. It needs to be 20 years. Okay, so you have a fuel that is 86 times worse for the climate than coal. You have the utilities that are free to ignore that because of the EPA rules. And you have a situation where really natural gas, once you look at leakage, which Dr. Robert Howarth has said for years, is more like 4 or 5%, not the 1.5% that the industry wants you to believe. And yes, you add in that leakage, and it's way, way worse for the climate than coal. You take this 86 times global warming potential and the leakage, and it's off the charts. Yeah. And that is why our methane levels in the atmosphere have gone from 750 to 1950 parts per billion in a relatively short time, 20 years, 30 years. Not that much time.
Yeah, you don't hear people talk about the parts per billion of methane. You hear about ppm of CO2, which has been going up about 1%. So we're now at 420, right? The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN organization, was started in 1988.
Yeah.
Right. And here we are 30 years later, and the problem is only getting worse.
Yeah.
And here's the good news. Okay. Decarbonizing the economy is only 40 gigatons of CO2e. Okay. It's a relatively small problem. There's 1 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. Sucking that out is a bigger problem, a much bigger problem. It's 25 times bigger of a problem. Now, there are some credible solutions. Check out my show with Peter Fikowski, peterfikowski.com. He's written a book called Climate Restoration, showing that if we augment some natural systems in the ocean, you can truly suck that carbon out. The question is, can you do that without completely disrupting the ecosphere or the ecosystems? And that's TBD, because it is messing with nature, so to speak. But we have to do something, and we have to act fast, because runaway climate change is already taking place. And you fast forward 30 years, and it's really going to be scary for our children and children's children. And that's just one of the quote unquote existential threats, right? There's many others that are coming down the pike here, AGI being one of them, artificial general intelligence, artificial biology, chemicals in the environment, et cetera, ocean acidification. They're really, it's truly a a gnarly scenario that our future holds for us. So this problem of decarbonizing the economy is actually the easy one, and we should just do that, right? We should just get it over. The energy transition is going to happen. It's a question of how fast, because the economics are on the side of these newer technologies, wind, solar, and energy storage, batteries, but other things too. So in our last minute or two together here, Nancy, I mean, I could talk to you all day, but we have to do other things besides just talk about PUCs. So what should our listeners know? What are some good resources for them if they're trying to improve the situation in their state? Of course, they could contact you and hire you as a consultant, which would be a good idea probably. But what should our listeners know about how to improve the scenario with PUCs and utilities?
Yeah, I would say look where you are. What state are you in? Who is there that's doing the work? Here in North Carolina, we've got lots of good advocates. There's always the national groups, 350.org. They're starting to look at Public Utilities Commission. Bill McKibben's new group called Third Act. They are actively starting to get involved in Public Utility Commission reform. Energy and Policy Institute digs up all the dirt. They dig up great dirt, unbelievable corruption. So I would recommend to people that you get involved wherever you are. Again, there's national groups. Electrify America is a great group. Rewiring America. And want to use my home here. We're finally putting solar up. Finally, because those rules were so awful. We have 2 electric vehicles, we have heat pumps, and once we get our solar, and it hopefully runs us about maybe, let's say 60% of our electricity use, we will have decarbonized at least a substantial portion. And so, start to look at who's doing what. And how can we help the people that are trying to decarbonize our society?
Have you been able to disrupt that no net metering rule, though, or no retail net metering rule in your home community?
Yes. So finally, what they did, Tim, was they finally submitted a proposal for net metering, but it's a $6 per kilowatt per month charge. So if you add that up, that's $7,200 a year extra fee after $720 a year. Sorry, $720 a year. Oh. You have 10 kW. So, but over the 30-year life of the system, that's $22,000.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the average savings from a solar system are only on the order of $1,000 a year.
Right. And so basically, they just killed the incentive. Right. So what I argued before the North Carolina Utilities Commission and App Voices is that if they allow my utility to add a $6 per kilowatt per month charge, it's going to we're going to continue to have no solar in Boone, despite the fact that 90% of the people want it, and that even New River Light and Power, which has done everything they could to kill solar, kill efficiency, no low income programs, no rebates, nothing, that we need this. Even New River Light and Power admitted that distributed solar is worth about 17 cents a kilowatt hour. 17 cents a kilowatt hour when the retail cost of electricity is going to be 15. So basically, we're doing them a favor by helping to produce electricity when it's going to be needed the most. I mean, I look at my street and I see that hardly anyone in my street has air conditioning. Maybe 20% of us do. If we have a heat wave like Portland did, we're going to have people over at our house because we'll have solar. Yeah. And this is what we are going to see going forward. The sad thing is, it's going to happen instead, Tim, in a nice managed way. It's going to be chaotic because the utilities are not doing what they need to do, and the regulators won't make them.
Wow. Well, I was hoping you would have some more good news for me today, but so I think one of my takeaways here is that we have to be very wary of natural gas and what utilities say about natural gas. That's very eye-opening about the parts per billion increase in the atmosphere of methane. Methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. And that is one of the topics that Peter Fikowski tackles. It's called accelerated oxidation of methane, or enhanced methane oxidation, EMO, because methane is going to come out of, for example, the tundra when the tundra melts because of climate change, right? And it's just spontaneously bubbling out, because when you have decomposition in anoxic environments, one of the byproducts is methane. So, well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank Nancy LaPlaca for coming on the show. Check out all of our content. cleanpowerhour.com is the place where you can find all of our content. You can click on the YouTube icon there and find our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and reach out to me. I love hearing from my listeners. You can contact me on the website. You can contact me on LinkedIn, and book a meeting. I love to book meetings with my listeners and learn what you're up to. I am a consultant to the clean energy industry. I work with installers, developers, and OEMs, and helping them go faster, further. So if you're a clean energy company looking for a consultant to help you with sales, marketing, and growth consulting, I'm your man. I want to thank Nancy LaPlaca for coming on the show today. How can our listeners find you, Nancy?
Well, they can Google me. Find me on LinkedIn is probably the best because I don't have a website, but just find me on LinkedIn. My name is unusual, so I'm very easy to find. And thanks so much, Tim. And please say hi to your dad.
Absolutely, will do. Well, I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, Nancy.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have Chin Power Systems, the leading three-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America. So check out CPS America. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. You know, we're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chinpowersystems.com to find out more.